Hey guys, welcome back. I really apologize for how long this video took. I know there were a ton of people requesting it for months now, but I kept procrastinating on it because I had my attention split across 3 different channels. Better late than never though, I guess? Last episode, we went over the land of Noxus, and by popular demand, for today's League of Legends faction lore video, we're gonna go over the frigid land of Freljord. I'm very excited to talk about this one because it's one of my favorites in terms of champion design. Vandal City, Demacia, Noxus, and Ionia sought to follow a playstyle or theme based on the region's culture and ideology, but the champions belonging to each faction didn't particularly share in any specific game mechanic. For example, Demacia's representatives placed an emphasis on head-on confrontation, choosing to forego any sort of trickery or deception for the sake of a fair fight. But in terms of how that was illustrated in their kits, it's hard to find a common ground as they all fight in their own ways. Freljord, on the other hand, is a region whose champions very noticeably share a gameplay theme, harboring some of the most resilient characters the game has to offer in both dealing pressure and withstanding it. You have to if you want to survive in such a callous and unforgiving land. So without further ado, let's talk about Freljord, the land with the most resilient champions in the game. Just a moment though, I have a quick shout out for today's sponsor, Hero Wars. Hero Wars is a fantasy RPG mobile game available on iOS and Android. It's an auto battle game, so for anyone looking for a low maintenance game, you can't find a better one than this. You get to form parties of different characters and deploy them in various game modes like the standard campaign where you can level up your team, get new equipment and skills. Each unit comes with their own set of abilities, cosmetics, equipment, and rarity, so there's a lot of focus around team building. Once you get the hang of it, you can take them into other game modes like the PvP arena where your team can fight against other players' teams. Hero Wars also allows you to fight alongside other players by joining a guild. Suffice to say, the game has a ton of content for you to explore through in terms of characters, dungeons, bosses, and activities. They have more than 100 million players, 300 Guild Wars servers, and 6 unique modes. To celebrate the holiday season though, they have a Christmas-themed event. Starting December 24th, you can collect new heroes, decorate the Christmas tree, check out the new story, and progress through the advent calendar. Also, if you join using my QR code on screen or the link below, you get 30,000 coins, 600 emeralds, and 5 new heroes to supplement your playthrough. So once again, click the link to play Hero Wars now. While Noxus offers its people a choice to waste away in mediocrity or make something of themselves, Freljord doesn't have this luxury whatsoever. The moment you set foot in this place, there's only one goal: survival. Shaped and built by the environment, those who managed to best the odds founded a series of tribes. They're proud and fiercely independent people, at times thought of as wild, rugged, or uncivilized, only bound together for the sake of staying alive, not to form a society of rules and etiquette. Following a great war that shattered the tenuous relationship between the sisters Avarosa, Cyrilda, and Lysandra several millennia ago, the Freljord would be subjected to a near-constant winter, and its savage lands wiped out all but a mere few, giving rise to 3 rival tribes that still remain today. The Winter's Claw houses Olaf, Udyr, and its leader Sejuani. Of the trio, the Winter's Claw is the most barbaric in nature, and the original land where Ashe came from until she stood against them. Sejuani endeavors to conquer the entire land of Freljord with an iron fist, believing that strength is the only thing that matters, not that far removed from the way of Noxus. Her idealism could be seen by many as primitive and belligerent. The Avarosans house Ashe, Gragas, Braum, Tryndamere, and the Cryophoenix Anivia, who sympathize with Ashe's values of peace and unification. In stark contrast to Sejuani, Ashe prefers to take on the harsh reality of Freljord through solidarity, trying to find a more pacifist solution instead of fighting for survival. Although she has the freedom to do so on the basis of the Avarosans living in less frigid regions, allowing for some semblance of agriculture, whereas the Winter's Claw are forced to endure the sheer cold up north. Fun fact, Ashe's marriage to Tryndamere was part of a diplomatic alliance, by the way. Finally, we have the Frostguard, housing Lysandra and Trundle. While the other 2 tribes handle day-to-day on the surface, the Frostguard live underground in the ruins of ancient Freljord, protecting their leader Lysandra while she watches over the Howling Abyss. You could say the Frostguard is to Freljord what the Black Rose is to Noxus, an organization shrouded in mystery and secrets, perhaps darker ones. Lysandra's plot for world domination was partially responsible for the onset of the Void. She conspired with the Watchers, the masters of all Voidborn, to bring about the end of the world before betraying them and imprisoning them in a barrier of ice. Not much else is known about the Frostguard otherwise. Those who don't swear allegiance to any faction are either beasts lost to time or mythical beings. Ornn, Volibear, and Anivia share a very interesting dynamic revolving around creation, destruction, and resurrection. Whether that has to do with their habitual tendencies or symbolic value is left up to interpretation. In a way, Freljord and its people were founded on similar principles as Ionia, Demacia, and Noxus. Their tribalism is reminiscent of Ionia's orders. Ashe's sense of peace and unification can be related to Demacia priding itself on being a safe haven from the Rune Wars and trying to protect one another from outside threats. Sejuani's brutal warmongering would be well received by Noxus's affinity for those who take matters into their own hands, while Lissandra's clandestine nefarious operations is not too far off from the dark underworld of those factions. One could argue that those who hail from the icy region face greater adversity than any other place, as they not only have to fight against a harsh climate, not only have to fight against each other and their clashing ideals, but also threats from neighboring lands. It seems like Noxus likes to attack everyone, seeing as Darius personally led multiple campaigns against Freljord, more so after his son was killed in action. Yet, despite how inhospitable it may seem, some interpret that as a place to grow stronger. Silas currently roams the Freljord looking for allies and power that he can use to get revenge on Demacia, while Talia and Vayne have ventured there for the sake of training. It's a very compelling faction to say the least. The simplistic nature of the landscape and its people belies the vast amounts of lore and history behind this land, almost like the tip of an iceberg concealing a greater whole of something. And I'd say his champions are also very much the same way. Simple on the surface, but more complex as you get to know them. Befitting a land where you see almost nothing but snow and ice, Freljordian champions have a central theme around those very things. Of the 14 representatives, 8 of them have ice-themed attacks. In traditional video game archetypes, the ice element is often associated with inhibition, slowing or freezing movements. This establishes their trademark playstyle, crowd control. Provided my memory is not escaping me, there is no other region in the game with more hard crowd control abilities than Freljord, or at the very least, the extent at which crowd control influences their gameplay. For most other champions, their hard CC has less of a narrative purpose and more of a gameplay function to round out their kit. Meanwhile, Freljordians are all about harnessing the hostile freezing land they call home and using that against their opponents. A good example of this would be the prevalence of universal applications. Braum's passive concussive blows allows him to threaten a stun on any target just by landing a basic attack or his Q. Neither of them result in a stun directly, but enemies now have to be concerned about being stunned regardless of who they're up against. Sejuani has a similar passive through Permafrost, where damage from her Winter's Wrath, auto attacks, or friendly melee autos can stack up into a stun. Ornn also contains a team-based interaction through his personal debuff, Brittle, causing the next immobilizing effect to deal bonus max health damage and last 30% longer if applicable. Those who don't have universal applications just have a mountain of internal crowd control, such as Gragas, Anivia, Gnar, Nunu, Lissandra, and Udyr. What they lack in raw pressure they make up for by preventing you from applying your own pressure, just like how most Freljordians, particularly Sejuani's tribe, survive by raiding and pillaging others. They steal your pressure away through crowd control, slows, or in Trundle's case, literally draining your stats away. Their reliance on crowd control and ability to enable allies to exert lockdown pressure of their own leads to a surprisingly cooperative playstyle as well. The purpose of stuns, knockups, and slows is to make it easier for you and by extension your team to score a kill on the enemy. Oftentimes, players are more afraid of the Blitzcrank or Morgana for their lockdown pressure than the AD carry standing right next to them, despite the latter doing all the damage. Many of his champions are also designed around having something they can share with others. Nunu's passive grants an attack and movement speed buff, Ornn can upgrade his teammates' items, Braum shields his team from projectiles and boosts their armor and magic resist, Ashe provides global vision and long-range cover fire, stuff like that. Barring exceptions like Tryndamere and Olaf, most Freljordians greatly rely on the rest of their team to help them finish the job, tying back to their strong sense of brotherhood. Whether out of loyalty or necessity, these people survive by working together. Hardly anyone can make it on their own, and so maximizing a Freljordian champion's strength involves working together as a team. Another core part of their gameplay has to do with their principles. The crowd control and slows explains the tools they use in battle, but I haven't yet covered their motivations for fighting. We already know where the protective nature of Demacians come from, or the self-centered attitudes of Noxians. As for Freljordians, regardless of where their allegiances lie, one thing holds true for all of them. Food is scarce, the climate is harsh, and Boreal, it's not a place for the faint of heart or body, giving us a second universal trait among most of his champions, resilience. Just like how there's no other region who zeroes in on crowd control as much as Freljordians do, I don't think there's another region with anywhere near the same amount of survivability as them. Braum, Gnar, Gragas, Nunu, Olaf, Ornn, Sejuani, Trundle, Udyr, Volibear, tanks and bruisers as far as the eye can see. Even the not-so-tanky champions like Anivia, Lissandra, and Tryndamere have ways to keep pressing on when backed into a corner. Anivia has a death passive, Lissandra has a built-in Zanya's Hourglass, and Tryndamere becomes immune to death itself. These guys have to endure sub-zero temperatures and hazardous conditions on a daily basis. Summoner's Rift, by comparison, is a trip to Hawaii with a premium vacation package. Personally, I love this more than their crowd control theme. Freljord's lore emphatically stresses that you're either born a warrior or dead on arrival. As soon as you step into the world, it's unironically you versus the world. It only makes sense that those who manage to last this long are tough as nails. They're no stranger to fighting on the front lines, and to an almost absurd extent, they face opposition head on, brute forcing their way through everything like they can take it and dish it right back. Brahm's unbreakable blocking projectiles to allow him and his team to advance, Olaf and Udyr brushing off all crowd control to charge forward, Sejuani having burst resistance by way of frost armor while she and Nunu have slow immunity, Volibear's thundering smash resetting if he's hard CC to show you that he doesn't give a fuck and will charge at you over and over again. There's something empowering about playing a champion from Freljord, not just when playing them, but having them on your team in general. It may just be me, but whenever I play a game where my team has no readily accessible hard CC, I get really nervous, especially if the enemy team has a dangerous hyper carry like Master Yi or Kassadin. No crowd control means engaging is difficult, and if you're on the receiving end of pressure, it becomes every man for themselves since no one can peel for you. It's reassuring to have a reliable frontline tank or someone with a lot of CC, such as Nunu, Ornn, Lissandra, or Braum. Most champions from Freljord are dependable, which is more than I can say for some other regions. In my Demacia video, I talked about how being too loyal to your in-game design boundaries can work against you, leading to champions becoming monotonous or uncreative, but that's only because the rules they followed were more prone to falling off in relevance. As mentioned before, Freljord and his people live and die by their ideals, and refuse to yield to anything. It's what made them strong, and fortunately in their case, that's partly why I think Freljord is one of the best designed regions in the game. Noxus and Demasia's rosters are considered homogeneous in a lot of ways, even though its adherents don't outwardly share a lot of gameplay similarities. Though Freljord has two prevailing themes, crowd control and resilience, you'd be hard-pressed to say that their gameplay is redundant. Among the juggernauts, Olaf, Trundle, Udyr, and Volibear, many would associate them with each other on the basis of being able to soak up a ton of damage, yet they have their own nuances in playstyle. Olaf is known for being able to ignore crowd control, Udyr is able to change between stances to adapt to the situation. Volibear can tower dive, Trundle can steal armor and magic resist. These situational quirks make all the difference in how that champion functions compared to the rest of the cast. That holds true for tanks as well, Sejuani, Braum, Gragas, Nunu, and Ornn. Sejuani singles out one person at a time, Braum protects his teammates from incoming fire, Gragas enjoys breaking enemy formation by dispersing them apart, Nunu's all about area coverage and long-range engage, and Ornn plays a very standard front-to-back 5v5, slowly but surely advancing forward. You would think that crowd control and tanking doesn't leave a whole lot of room for nuance, but Riot managed to make every Freljordian stand out in their own way. The two mages, Anivia and Lissandra, play wildly different from each other even though they both have stuns and slows. Same with Ashe, supplying cover fire, long-range pressure, and vision control. Sure, you can make a case that Sejuani's Arctic Assault and Gragas' Body Slam are virtually identical, or Volibear's Q is the exact same as Udyr's E, yet they still feel very different from each other. But that's the thing, they stand out from one another while following the same creed. Ionian champions are naturally very different from each other since Ionia espouses the act of self-discovery and fulfillment, not to mention the vast diversity of its culture, races, environment, and whatnot. Freljord is nothing but ice and snow, and its champions still manage to find their own way of doing battle. Experience-wise, I think what lends credence to Freljord's stability is their priorities. It's easy for Noxian champions to spiral out of control since they're very damage and mobility oriented, two attributes that are prone to over-tuning. Being overly tanky can be a problem, and it definitely has in earlier years. Gragas, Ornn, and Sejuani were beasts during the tank meta in seasons 5 to 8, but with how much tank busting we have today, it's easier to keep them in check. The only other concern is how stat checky many of his champs are, like Olaf, Tryndamere, and Trundle and stuff. But a stat checker's strength, their one-dimensional playstyle, is also a weakness, so it balances out. It also has a lot to do with the situational nature of their power. Crowd control is objectively very strong, but it's only ever a setup into something. Lockdown by itself does nothing, there has to be a follow-up of some kind. Champions with a lot of CC in their kits usually don't come with enough damage to finish the job on their own, and before you say what about the full AD one-shot Udyr with Prowlers and Empowered Q? That's called cheese, my friend. Udyr gets one-shotted just as easily as he one-shots them. It's no different from Renekton stunning a person than blowing himself up. That's not to say tanks can't deal their fair share of damage. If you give Volibear, Sejuani, Ornn, or Nunu enough time, they can and will destroy you, but obviously it's not as fast. And that brings me to the final thing that keeps them in line. Freljordian champions are slow. In exchange for their resilience, they don't have a lot of mobility, and what mobility they do have is slow or predictable. Lissandra's glacial path takes a long time to travel a set distance compared to Katarina's Shunpo or Talon's wall parkour. Gragas and Sejuani's dashes don't scale with movement speed, they retain a static pace. The region in general doesn't have a whole lot of speed or burst damage. They pressure you slowly but surely. Mind you, their pressure is enormous and not something you can ignore, but time is what makes them feel less unfair than the speedy rushdown playstyles of Noxus and Ionia. It gives the opponents time to react to the situation at hand. Altogether, Freljord's champions are given the freedom to express their playstyles and design in areas that are naturally regulated while being constrained in areas that had the highest chance of becoming volatile, thus making them less likely to turn into balanced nightmares or permaban champions outside of instances where they might be slightly overtuned. It's been over 10 years, and it still managed to stay in its lane. Though that might be because the last Freljord champion we got was Ornn over 5 years ago, and 200 years didn't really become a thing until like 2019. That being said, we still had reworks to Nunu, Udyr, and Volibear, and at least 2 of them are considered by many to be among the best reworks in history, so my point still stands. So far, out of all the regions I've covered, Freljord is the region most loyal to its narrative history that also has the healthiest design roster. Of course that might change as we still have Shurima, The Void, Bilgewater, Shadow Isles, Targon, Piltover, Zaun, Ixtal. God, I'm never gonna finish this series. But for now at least, it's arguably the best designed. That's gonna be it for today. Sorry again for taking so long to make the next episode. I was honestly just being lazy, but glad to finally make it. I promise the next one won't take as long, mark my words. Anyways, if you enjoyed today's video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and subscribed. Consider following me on Twitter at Vars, joining my Discord server, and if you haven't yet, check out my other Champion Faction Lore episodes after this one. Until next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.